The last time I saw my father, I was 19 years old, sitting in a hospital bed with an IV drip in my arm and a bald head covered by a knit cap my grandmother had made. Today, I'm walking through the glass doors of the Riverside Community Center, my hair thick and healthy again, wearing the navy dress I bought with my first nursing paycheck. The banner stretched across the entrance reads, Chen Family Reunion, celebrating 60 years of Michael Chen, in gold letters that catch the afternoon sunlight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The smell of barbecue and fresh-cut grass drifts through the open windows, mixed with the sound of children playing and adults catching up on years of family gossip. I pause at the registration table, my hand trembling slightly as I reach into my purse. Inside is a manila envelope, worn soft from handling, containing a document I wrote 7 years ago when I thought I might die. The will I drafted during my third round of chemotherapy, lying in a hospital bed at 3 a.m. while my family slept safely in their beds 30 miles away, convinced I was too sick, too expensive, too much of a burden to be worth their time. They had no idea I was planning who would inherit the life insurance money from my part-time job, or that I was deciding which of my few possessions should go to the cousin who still texted me when everyone else had gone silent. The registration volunteer, a woman I don't recognize, looks up at me with polite curiosity. Name, please? She asks, her finger hovering over the guest list. Sarah Chen, I reply, watching her scan the page. Her finger stops and she glances up at me again, this time with something that might be recognition or confusion. Oh, she says quietly, you're Mike's daughter. The way she says it tells me everything I need to know about what story they've been told about where I've been for the past 7 years. I step into the main hall where round tables covered in white tablecloths are scattered across the polished floor. Helium balloons in blue and silver bob from chairbacks, and a slideshow of family photos plays on a large screen near the front of the room. Children run between tables while adults balance paper plates loaded with potato salad and grilled chicken. The sound of laughter echoes off the high ceiling, the kind of warm, familial noise that once made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Now it sounds foreign, like a language I used to speak but have somehow forgotten. My eyes scan the crowd until I find him. Michael Chen stands near the dessert table, his hair grayer than I remember, but his posture still straight and commanding. He's wearing the same type of polo shirt he's worn to every family gathering for as long as I can remember. Navy blue with the Chen's hardware logo embroidered on the chest. He's holding a piece of birthday cake and nodding as Uncle Robert tells what appears to be an animated story, his free hand gesturing toward the photo display. From this distance, he looks exactly like the father who used to take me fishing on Sunday mornings and taught me how to change a tire in the parking lot behind his first hardware store. That version of my father disappeared the day Dr. Martinez sat us all down in her office and explained that Hodgkin's lymphoma was serious but treatable, that the next 6 months would be difficult but that my prognosis was good. I remember the way his face changed when she started talking about treatment costs and insurance coverage, how his eyes went distant when she mentioned that I might need to take a semester off from college. By the time we walked out of that appointment, I could feel something fundamental shifting between us, like a foundation settling in a way that would never quite be level again. My mother, Linda, sits at the head table, her graying hair pulled back in the same bun she's worn for decades. She's talking to my Aunt Patricia, their heads bent together in the way women do when they're sharing something they don't want overheard. Linda looks smaller than I remember, her shoulders curved inward, as if she's carrying something heavy. When I was going through treatment, I used to imagine what she was telling people about my absence from family gatherings. I pictured her making excuses, saying I was busy with school or work, anything to avoid explaining that her daughter was fighting cancer while they pretended I no longer existed. David, my older brother, leans against the wall near the photo display, checking his phone with the expression of someone who would rather be anywhere else. He's wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, the uniform of someone who works in the family business but hasn't quite figured out how to make it look natural. David was always the one who was supposed to take over Chen's hardware, the heir apparent who understood profit margins and inventory management in a way I never could. When I got sick, I think part of him was relieved that there would be one less person competing for Dad's attention and approval. The photo slideshow cycling behind him shows decades of Chen family history. Birthday parties, graduations, holiday celebrations, business milestones. I watch for a few minutes, looking for my own face among the images. There I am at age 8, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a trophy from the spelling bee. Age 12, standing between my parents at David's high school graduation. Age 16, dressed up for homecoming with a corsage that matches my purple dress. And then, abruptly, the photos stop, including me. After my 18th birthday party, I simply disappear from the family narrative as if I had never existed at all. The absence is so glaring that I wonder if anyone else has noticed, but the guests seem to be enjoying the nostalgia without questioning why the slideshow spans 40 years but only includes 3 decades of my life. They see what they expect to see: a successful family business, proud parents, accomplished children. The missing pieces don't register because they've been told a story that explains away my absence. Whatever version of events my parents created to account for my disappearance, it was convincing enough that none of these people ever thought to ask questions. I find a seat at an empty table in the back corner, close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid immediate detection. From here I can see the entire room and plan my approach. The envelope in my purse feels heavier with each passing minute. Weighted not just with paper, but with 7 years of silence. 7 years of rebuilding myself from nothing. 7 years of wondering if the people who raised me ever think about the daughter they discarded when she became inconvenient. The first time I ended up in the emergency room, David was the one who drove me. It was 2 weeks after my initial diagnosis, and I had been feeling increasingly weak and nauseated. When I called the house at midnight, dizzy and unable to keep water down, David answered on the 3rd ring and didn't hesitate to come get me. He sat in the waiting room for 4 hours while they ran tests and adjusted my medications, texting our parents updates and bringing me ice chips when the nurse said I could have them. That night, I thought we were going to face this together as a family. David held my hand while the doctor explained that this was normal, that my body was adjusting to the chemotherapy, that the worst part was often the uncertainty and fear rather than the physical symptoms themselves. When they finally discharged me at 6 a.m, David drove me back to my apartment and helped me up the stairs to my 2nd-floor unit, carrying my purse and making sure I had everything I needed before he left for work. But something changed in the weeks that followed. The calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. When I texted about upcoming appointments or small victories like keeping food down for a whole day, the responses became shorter and less engaged. "Good to hear," David would write back, or "Glad you're feeling better," as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than his sister, who was fighting for her life 30 miles away from the house where he still lived with our parents. The shift was so gradual that I didn't recognize it at first. I attributed the silence to everyone being busy, to the discomfort people feel around illness, to the simple fact that cancer is scary and no one knows what to say. I made excuses for them because the alternative, that they were deliberately pulling away, was too painful to consider. Even when weeks passed without a phone call, even when my birthday came and went without acknowledgement, even when I spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, eating soup from a can, because I was too weak to cook and too proud to ask for help. It wasn't until I called the house one evening in December, desperate for connection and comfort after a particularly brutal treatment session, that I finally understood what was happening. My mother answered the phone, and when I said hello, there was a long pause before she responded. "Sarah," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" I told her about the treatment, about how the doctors were optimistic, about how I was learning to manage the side effects and even starting to think about going back to school part-time in the spring. I talked for several minutes, filling the silence with updates and small talk, waiting for her to respond with something warm or encouraging or even just interested. Instead, when I finished speaking, she was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. "Mom?" I said. "Are you there?" "I'm here," she replied. "Sarah, your father and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's best if you focus on getting better without worrying about family obligations right now. You have enough on your plate." The words hit me like a physical blow. Family obligations. As if loving them, needing them, wanting to be part of their lives was somehow a burden I was placing on them, rather than the natural connection between a daughter and her parents. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand. "We just think you need space to heal," she continued, her voice growing more distant with each word. And we need space to process all of this too. This has been really hard on all of us, Sarah. Really hard on your father especially. The stress of worrying about you, the financial pressure, watching you go through this, it's affecting his health, his work, everything. I stood in my kitchen, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white, processing what she was really saying. That my cancer was inconvenient for them, that my need for support and love during the most frightening time of my life was somehow selfish. That they had decided it was easier to pretend I didn't exist than to figure out how to be a family during a crisis. So you're cutting me off, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We're giving everyone space, she corrected, as if the euphemism made the abandonment more palatable. When you're better, when this is all behind us, we can talk about rebuilding. But right now, this is what's best for everyone. I hung up the phone and sat on my kitchen floor for 2 hours, crying until I had no tears left. Then I got up, made myself a cup of tea, and started writing my will. If my family could walk away from me when I needed them most, I would make sure they never had the chance to walk back in when it was convenient for them again. The document I wrote that night wasn't just about distributing my possessions in case I died. It was about reclaiming control over my own life and death, about ensuring that the people who abandoned me would have no say in how my story ended. Now, sitting in this community center, watching my father laugh and accept congratulations on 60 years of life, I reach into my purse and touch the envelope that contains that will. 7 years later, I'm alive and healthy and successful. A pediatric oncology nurse who helps other families navigate the crisis that mine couldn't handle. I survived the cancer, and I survived them. But they don't know that yet. They don't know anything about the woman I've become, the life I've built, the strength I've found in learning to love myself when no one else would. The slideshow behind David shifts to a new photo. My father cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of his third hardware store location. In the picture, he's smiling broadly, surrounded by local business owners and politicians, holding oversized scissors while a small crowd applauds. The photo was taken 4 years ago, right around the time I finished my nursing degree and started working at Portland Children's Hospital. While he was expanding his business empire, I was learning how to insert IVs and comfort frightened children and explain complicated medical procedures to worried parents. We were both building something, but only one of us had to do it alone. A little girl with pigtails runs past my table, chasing a balloon that has broken free from its string. She's laughing with the kind of pure joy that only children possess, completely absorbed in the moment and oblivious to the adult complexities swirling around her. I watch her weave between tables, dodging relatives and grabbing for the silver balloon that stays just out of reach. For a moment, I remember being that age at family gatherings like this one, feeling safe and loved and certain that these people would always be there for me no matter what happened. That little girl has no idea that families can evaporate when life gets complicated, that love can have conditions you don't discover until you need it most, that the people who are supposed to protect you can decide you're not worth the trouble. I hope she never learns those lessons the way I did. I hope her family is stronger than mine, more committed to standing together when the storms come. But if they're not, I hope she learns sooner than I did that she can build her own foundation, create her own family, become her own source of strength and love. Jake Martinez appears at my elbow so quietly that I don't notice him until he pulls out the chair next to mine. My cousin looks older than his 27 years, his dark hair receding slightly, and his face showing the kind of tiredness that comes from working too many days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Double shifts. He's wearing jeans and a polo shirt, more casual than most of the other guests, and there's something in his expression that tells me he knows exactly why I'm here. Sarah, he says simply, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension. I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I turned to face him fully for the first time in 7 years, taking in the changes that time has made to the cousin who used to be my closest friend growing up. Jake was always the family rebel, the one who questioned authority and pushed boundaries, and got into trouble for saying things that needed to be said but that no one wanted to hear. When we were teenagers, I envied his ability to speak his mind without caring about the consequences. Now I realize that trait might have been what kept him connected to me, when everyone else found it easier to look away. I got your message, I tell him, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. About finding the will. He nods slowly, glancing around the room to make sure no one is close enough to overhear our conversation. It was in Grandma's hope chest, he says quietly. Mom was helping clean out her house after she passed, and she found this folder with your name on it. Inside was your will, and a bunch of medical papers, and... He pauses, seeming to gather his courage. And a letter you wrote to Grandma explaining everything. The letter. I had forgotten about that part, the pages I wrote to my grandmother after my parents cut me off, trying to explain why I wouldn't be at Christmas dinner, or Easter brunch, or any of the other family gatherings that had once been the rhythm of my year. Grandma Chen was the only one who continued to call me occasionally, though even those conversations became strained and infrequent as time passed. I never knew if she understood what had really happened or if she believed whatever story my parents had told to explain my absence. She kept everything? I ask, though part of me already knows the answer. Grandma Chen was the keeper of family history, the one who saved report cards and birthday cards and school photos in carefully labeled boxes that she stored in her basement. Of course she would have kept my letter. Of course she would have preserved the evidence of what really happened to me, even if she never felt able to act on it. Everything, Jake confirms. Including copies of your medical records and the hospital bills. Sarah, I had no idea how bad it got. I mean, I knew you were sick, but they told us you'd moved away for treatment, that you wanted space, that you were doing fine but just needed to focus on getting better without family distractions. The lie was so perfectly crafted, so reasonable sounding that I can understand why everyone believed it. Of course, a young person with cancer might want to focus entirely on treatment without the pressure of maintaining family relationships. Of course, she might decide that distance was better for everyone involved. The story gave my relatives permission to stop worrying about me, while also making them feel noble for respecting my supposed wishes for space and independence. But the will, Jake continues, his voice dropping even lower, the will told a completely different story. You wrote about how scared you were, how alone you felt, how you were trying to figure out who should get your things because your family had stopped talking to you. You wrote about lying in the hospital at night, wondering if you were going to die without ever seeing any of us again. I feel my throat tighten as he repeats words I wrote 7 years ago in the depths of despair and terror. That night, writing my will had felt like the only control I had left in a situation where everything had been taken away from me. Deciding who would inherit my books, my jewelry, my small savings account, had been a way of asserting that my life had mattered. That even if my family couldn't be bothered to care whether I lived or died, there were still people in the world who valued me enough to be trusted with my final wishes. The worst part, Jake says, his eyes fixed on the table as if he can't bear to look at me while he speaks, was reading how grateful you were that I still texted you sometimes. How you wrote that, even though we barely talked, knowing that one person in the family still remembered you existed made you feel less invisible. Those texts. I had forgotten how much they meant to me during the darkest months of treatment. Jake would send me random messages about his job or a movie he'd seen, or just to ask how I was feeling, nothing profound or life-changing, just small reminders that I was still connected to someone who shared my last name. At the time, I don't think he realized how significant those casual check-ins were to someone who had been erased from her own family's narrative. When I read that, he continues, I realized that I was the only one who stayed in touch with you, even a little bit, and I still didn't do nearly enough. I should have questioned the story we were told. I should have visited you in the hospital. I should have been there. I reach across the table and touch his hand briefly, a gesture of forgiveness that I'm surprised to discover I actually feel. You were 20 years old, Jake. You were dealing with your own life, your own problems. You weren't responsible for fixing our family's dysfunction. Maybe not, he says, but I was responsible for being a decent human being. And I failed at that. We sit in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party continue around us. Children have claimed one corner of the room for an impromptu game of tag, their laughter mixing with the more subdued conversations of the adults. The photo slideshow has moved on to more recent images. David's wedding last year, the opening of the newest hardware store location, various grandchildren and great-grandchildren who have been born since I disappeared from the family story. So what's the plan? Jake asks finally. I assume you didn't come here just to reminisce about old times. I smile for the first time since entering the building, feeling some of the tension in my shoulders release. I'm going to give a speech, I tell him. During the toast portion of the evening, I'm going to stand up and remind everyone who I am and what really happened 7 years ago. With the will as evidence? With the will as evidence, I confirm, and with you as a witness to verify that everything I'm saying is true. Jake nods slowly, his expression serious but determined. Whatever you need, he says. It's the least I can do. Actually, I tell him, reaching into my purse again, there's something else I need you to do first. I pull out a second envelope, smaller than the first, and hand it to him. I need you to give this to my mother before I speak. It's a letter I wrote this morning, explaining why I'm here and what I'm about to do. I want her to have a chance to read it before everything happens. He takes the envelope, turning it over in his hands. Are you giving her a chance to stop you? No, I say firmly. I'm giving her a chance to remember who I used to be before everyone finds out who I've become. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in January, 3 weeks after my parents cut off contact. I was sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office for my weekly check-in, feeling stronger than I had in months and cautiously optimistic about my progress. The chemotherapy was working. My latest scans showed that the cancer was responding to treatment exactly as hoped. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was beginning to believe that I was going to survive this. Your numbers look excellent, Sarah, Dr. Rodriguez said, reviewing my test results with the kind of smile that oncologists reserve for genuinely good news. If we continue to see improvement like this, we should be able to start talking about the end of treatment in the next few months. I felt tears spring to my eyes, but for once they were tears of relief rather than fear. Really? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. You think I'm going to be okay? I think you're going to be more than okay, she replied. You're young, you're strong, and you're responding beautifully to treatment. This isn't going to define the rest of your life, Sarah. You're going to have a full, normal life after this. I walked out of that appointment feeling lighter than I had in months, practically floating with the knowledge that my future was beginning to come back into focus. I wanted to share the news with someone, to celebrate this milestone with people who loved me and had been worried about me and would understand what this progress meant. Without thinking, I called my parents' house, my finger dialing the familiar number automatically. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice cautious when she heard mine. Sarah? She said. Is everything okay? You're not supposed to call here. The reminder stung, but I pushed past it, too excited to let their arbitrary rules dampen my joy. Mom, I just came from the doctor, and the news is incredible. The treatment is working. She thinks I'm going to beat this. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, that's nice, honey. Nice. As if I had told her about a pleasant lunch or a good movie, not that her daughter was going to live instead of die. Mom, I said, my voice growing more urgent. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I'm going to be okay. I'm going to survive this. I heard you, she replied, her tone still maddeningly neutral. That's wonderful news. So can we please end this ridiculous separation? I asked, the words tumbling out faster than I could control them. Can I come home for dinner this weekend? Can we please just be a family again? Another pause, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was firmer, more resolved. Sarah, we've been through this. You need to focus on your health, and we need to focus on moving forward. Just because the medical news is good doesn't mean anything else has changed. Everything has changed, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm not dying anymore, Mom. I'm going to be healthy again. I can go back to school, get a job, have a normal life. We can all go back to normal. Normal was never this, she said quietly. Normal was before you got sick, before everything became about cancer and hospitals and medical bills and worry. We found our balance again, Sarah. We figured out how to be happy without all the stress and chaos that comes with your situation. Your situation. as if my cancer was something I had chosen, something I had inflicted on them rather than a random tragedy that had happened to all of us. As if my need for love and support during the most terrifying experience of my life was somehow selfish rather than fundamentally human. "You're saying that you're happier without me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that we've learned to live with the reality of our circumstances," she replied. "And sometimes that means making difficult choices about what's best for everyone involved." I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. My parents weren't waiting for me to get better so we could reunite as a family. They had used my illness as an opportunity to cut me out of their lives permanently, and my recovery was actually inconvenient because it meant their abandonment was no longer justifiable on medical grounds. That night, I revised my will. Instead of leaving everything to Jake and a few close friends, I specified that my parents and David should receive nothing, not out of spite, but out of clarity. If they didn't want to be part of my life, they didn't deserve to benefit from my death. If they couldn't love me when I was vulnerable and afraid, they shouldn't inherit from me when I was gone. 7 years later, sitting in this community center and watching my father accept congratulations on his longevity, I realized that the will was never really about dying. It was about living. It was about deciding that my life had value, even when the people who were supposed to love me most decided it didn't. It was about choosing to invest in relationships with people who saw me as a complete person, rather than a burden or an inconvenience. The will was the beginning of my real life, the life I've built in Portland with friends who show up when I need them, and colleagues who respect my work, and patients who trust me with their children's care. It's a life my parents know nothing about, a success story they played no part in creating. And now, finally, they're gonna learn what they gave up when they decided I wasn't worth the trouble of loving. The moment Jake walks away with the letter for my mother, I feel the weight of 7 years settling into my bones. Around me, the celebration continues in blissful ignorance of what's about to unfold. Children chase each other between tables, while adults balance plates of barbecue and engage in the comfortable small talk that fills family reunions. The photo slideshow continues its endless loop, displaying decades of Chen family milestones that conveniently skip over my existence after age 18. I watch Jake approach the head table where my mother sits with Aunt Patricia, their conversation animated as they catch up on neighborhood gossip and shared memories. When Jake taps Linda on the shoulder and hands her the envelope, I see her face change immediately. She recognizes my handwriting on the front, and even from across the room, I can see the color drain from her cheeks. Her hand shakes slightly as she tears open the seal and unfolds the single page inside. The letter I wrote this morning was simple and direct. "Mom, I'm here today because I want our family to finally know the truth about what happened 7 years ago. I'm healthy, I'm successful, and I'm no longer the scared 19-year-old you abandoned when cancer became inconvenient. You have 5 minutes to decide whether you want to tell Dad I'm here, or whether you want him to find out when I stand up to speak during the toast. Either way, the silence ends tonight. Love, Sarah." I watch my mother read those words, her lips moving slightly as she processes each sentence. When she finishes, she folds the letter carefully and slips it into her purse, her movements deliberate and controlled. She says something to Patricia, who immediately turns to scan the room until her eyes land on me. Patricia's expression shifts from confusion to shock to something that might be shame, and she reaches across the table to grip Linda's hand. For a moment, I think my mother might get up and come to me. I imagine her walking across the room, sitting down at my table, and asking the question she should have asked 7 years ago. I picture her apologizing, explaining, trying to bridge the gap that her choices created. But instead, she pulls out her phone and types a quick text message. 30 seconds later, David's phone buzzes in his pocket. He reads the message, looks directly at me for the first time since I arrived, and immediately heads toward my father. The conversation between David and my father is brief but intense. I watch David lean close to whisper something in Dad's ear, see my father's face go rigid with what looks like panic or anger. Dad's eyes sweep the room until they find me, and for several long seconds, we stare at each other across the crowded community center. His expression is unreadable, a carefully controlled mask that gives away nothing about what he's thinking or feeling. Then he does something I don't expect. Instead of coming to confront me or demand that I leave, he walks to the front of the room and taps the microphone that's been set up for the evening's speeches. The feedback squeals briefly before he adjusts it, and the room gradually quiets as people realize he's about to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he begins, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who's spent decades addressing crowds at school board meetings and community events. Before we get to the formal toasts, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special who's joined us this evening. My heart pounds as I realize what's happening. He's going to try to control the narrative again, to frame my presence here, in a way that serves his version of events. This is exactly what he did 7 years ago, when he told everyone I had run away, had left an angry note, had chosen to abandon my family rather than deal with my problems responsibly. He's going to try to paint himself as the gracious patriarch welcoming home a prodigal daughter, positioning himself as magnanimous and forgiving, while making me look like the one who created this rift. "My daughter Sarah is here with us tonight," he continues, gesturing in my direction. "She's been away for several years, focusing on her health and building her career in Portland. We're so proud of what she's accomplished, and we're grateful she could be here to celebrate this milestone with our family." The applause that follows is polite but confused. I can see people looking around, trying to figure out who Sarah is, why they haven't seen her at family events, why this is the first they're hearing about Mike Chen's daughter, who's been living in Portland. A few of the older relatives seem to remember me from childhood gatherings, their faces showing recognition mixed with puzzlement about my long absence. Sarah recently completed her nursing degree and is working at Portland Children's Hospital, Dad continues, his voice warm and proud in a way that makes my stomach turn. She specializes in pediatric oncology, helping children and families navigate some of life's most challenging circumstances. We couldn't be more proud of the compassionate, dedicated healthcare professional she's become. The irony is so thick I can barely breathe. He's describing my career in helping families through cancer treatment, while conveniently omitting the fact that his own family abandoned me during my own cancer battle. He's praising my compassion and dedication while ignoring the fact that he showed me neither when I needed it most. He's taking credit for my success while having played no role in achieving it. I stand up slowly, my legs unsteady but my resolve absolute. The room turns to look at me as I make my way toward the front, my heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. When I reach the microphone, my father steps aside but doesn't leave the stage. He stands next to me with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, one hand hovering near my shoulder as if he might embrace me. "Thank you, Dad," I say into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "That was a beautiful introduction, and you're right about my career. I do help families navigate challenging circumstances. I've learned a lot about what families need during medical crises, and I've also learned a lot about what happens when families fail to provide that support." I can see confusion spreading across faces in the audience. This isn't the direction they expected my remarks to take. My father's smile falters slightly, and I feel him tense beside me. 7 years ago, when I was 19 years old, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, I continue, watching as the room collectively holds its breath. It was scary and overwhelming, but my doctors were optimistic. The treatment was going to be difficult, but my prognosis was good. I was going to beat this cancer and go on to live a full, healthy life. I paused to let that information sink in, watching as people begin to put pieces together. Jake has positioned himself near the front of the room, his phone in his hand, ready to provide visual evidence of what I'm about to reveal. What I didn't expect, I continue, was that my cancer diagnosis would be too stressful, too expensive, too inconvenient for my family to handle. 3 months into my treatment, after several rounds of chemotherapy and multiple hospitalizations, my parents decided that supporting me through cancer was more than they were willing to do. The silence in the room is complete now. I can hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside, but no one in this community center is making a sound. My father has gone completely still beside me, his face pale and his jaw clenched. They told me I needed space to focus on getting better, I say, pulling the manila envelope from my purse. They said they needed space to process the stress of having a sick daughter. And then they cut off all contact, changed the locks on the house, blocked my phone number, told everyone in the family that I had run away, that I had left an angry note, that I was unstable and possibly involved with dangerous people. A few gasps echo through the room. I see Aunt Patricia covering her mouth with her hand, Uncle Robert shaking his head in disbelief. Near the back, some of the younger relatives are pulling out their phones, either to record what's happening or to fact-check what I'm saying against their own memories. The truth, I say, opening the envelope and pulling out the will I wrote 7 years ago, is documented right here. This is my last will and testament, written during my 3rd round of chemotherapy when I was alone in the hospital at 3 a.m, trying to figure out who should inherit my few possessions if I died. Not because I wanted to die, but because my family had abandoned me, and I needed to make arrangements for a life they were no longer part of. I hold up the document so everyone can see it, though I know most of them won't be able to read the details from their seats. Jake, would you please show everyone the copy you found in Grandma Chen's hope chest? Jake steps forward and holds up his phone, displaying a clear photo of the will's first page. This document is dated February 15th, 7 years ago, he announces to the room. It includes Sarah's medical information, her hospital contact details, and a detailed explanation of how her family cut off contact during her cancer treatment. I watch my father's face as Jake speaks, seeing the careful mask finally beginning to crack. His mouth opens slightly, as if he wants to interrupt to explain, to somehow regain control of the narrative. But there's nothing he can say that will change what's written in black and white, witnessed and notarized, preserved by his own mother, who clearly understood the significance of what she was keeping. I wrote this will because I was 19 years old and terrified that I was going to die alone, I continue, my voice growing stronger with each word. I wrote it because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had decided that my cancer was too much trouble. I wrote it because I wanted to make sure that if I didn't survive, the people who actually cared about me would be the ones to benefit from what little I had to leave behind. I turned to face my father directly for the first time since taking the microphone. You told everyone I ran away. You said I left an angry note. You painted me as an unstable young woman who couldn't handle responsibility and chose to abandon her family rather than deal with her problems. His mouth moves, but no sound comes out. For the first time in my life, Michael Chen is speechless. But I didn't run away, I say, turning back to address the room. I didn't leave an angry note. I fought cancer alone for 8 more months after my family abandoned me. I worked night shifts at a diner to pay for treatment that insurance didn't cover. I slept on friends' couches because I couldn't afford rent and medical bills at the same time. I graduated from nursing school with honors, while managing the long-term effects of chemotherapy, and I built a career helping other families avoid the mistakes my own family made. The murmur that runs through the crowd is different now. Instead of confusion, I hear anger. Instead of polite curiosity, I hear outrage. These people are beginning to understand that they've been living with a lie for 7 years, that they've participated in the erasure of a young woman who was fighting for her life. Mrs. Henderson, who taught Sunday school when I was a child, stands up slowly from her table near the front. Sarah, honey, she says, her voice shaking with emotion. Are you telling us that you went through cancer treatment completely alone? That your parents knew you were sick and chose not to help you? That's exactly what I'm telling you, I reply, and I have the documentation to prove it. Hospital records showing that I listed friends as emergency contacts because my family refused to be involved. Financial aid applications where I marked myself as estranged from my parents. Performance reviews from the diner where I worked night shifts between chemotherapy sessions. I see my mother standing at the head table, tears streaming down her face, but she doesn't move to leave or to defend herself. She just stands there, frozen, as if she's finally realizing the magnitude of what she participated in 7 years ago. The worst part, I continue, wasn't even the abandonment itself. It was the lies they told afterward. For 7 years, everyone in this room believed that I was the one who walked away from this family. You believed that I was selfish, irresponsible, unstable. You believed that I chose to cut ties rather than deal with my problems like an adult. David finally speaks up from where he's been standing near the photo display. Sarah, that's not how it happened, he says, his voice defensive but uncertain. You stopped calling. You stopped coming around. We thought you wanted space. I turn to look at my brother, this man who once sat with me in emergency rooms and brought me ice chips when I was too nauseated to keep water down. David, I stopped calling because Mom told me not to. I stopped coming around because Dad changed the locks. I didn't want space. I wanted my family to care whether I lived or died. The silence that follows is deafening. I can see people looking at each other, reassessing everything they thought they knew about the Chen family dynamic. I can see my parents' friends and colleagues beginning to understand that the people they've respected and trusted for decades are capable of abandoning their own sick child. But here's what you all need to understand, I say, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. I didn't come here for an apology. I didn't come here to reunite with people who proved they don't deserve to be in my life. I came here because for 7 years, you've all been living with a lie, and lies have a way of spreading and poisoning everything they touch. I fold the will carefully and put it back in the envelope. I came here because some of you have children and grandchildren, and someday one of them might face a crisis that tests your family's strength. When that happens, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what it looks like when parents choose their own comfort over their child's survival. I want you to remember the difference between the story people tell about themselves and the truth of who they actually are. The room is so quiet, I can hear my own heartbeat. My father has moved away from me slightly, as if physical distance might somehow protect him from the impact of my words. My mother has sat back down, her face buried in her hands. Most importantly, I continue, I want you to understand that families don't get to rewrite history just because the truth is inconvenient. My parents spent 7 years telling people that I abandoned them, but the documentation tells a different story. They spent 7 years pretending to be victims of an ungrateful daughter, but the medical records show who the real victim was. I step away from the microphone and address my father directly, speaking loudly enough that everyone can hear. Dad, you built your reputation on being a leader, a man of integrity, someone who guides and protects young people. But when your own daughter needed guidance and protection, you threw her away like garbage. You don't get to take credit for the woman I became, because you played no role in helping me become her. Michael Chen finally finds his voice, though it comes out as barely more than a whisper. Sarah, you don't understand the pressure we were under, the medical bills, the stress, watching you suffer. It was destroying our family. No, I reply firmly. What destroyed our family was your decision to prioritize your own comfort over your daughter's life. Other families face medical crises and find ways to support each other. Other parents figure out how to love their children through difficult circumstances. You chose the easy way out, and then you lied about it for 7 years. I turn back to the microphone for my final words. I'm 34 years old now. I've been cancer-free for 6 years. I have a career I love, friends who would do anything for me, and a life that's meaningful and fulfilling. I built all of that without any help from the people who were supposed to love me most. I look out at the crowd, seeing faces that are angry, sad, ashamed, confused. Those of you who believed the lies my parents told, I don't blame you. They were convincing liars, and you had no reason to doubt them. But now you know the truth, and what you do with that information is up to you. I pick up my purse and the envelope, preparing to leave. To my parents and my brother, I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you've earned forgiveness, but because carrying anger for 7 years was exhausting, and I'm done with it. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean I want you in my life. It just means I'm choosing to let go of the hurt, so I can move forward without carrying your failures with me. As I walk toward the exit, the room remains completely silent. No one follows me, no one calls my name, no one tries to stop me from leaving. But I don't feel the crushing loneliness I felt 7 years ago when I walked away from my family for the first time. This time, I'm walking away as someone who knows exactly who she is and what she's worth. Jake catches up with me in the parking lot, slightly out of breath from hurrying to follow me outside. "Sarah, wait," he calls. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" I turn to face him, and for the first time in hours, I smile genuinely. "I'm more than okay," I tell him. "I'm free." "What happens now?" he asks. "Do you think any of them will try to contact you?" I consider the question as we walk toward my rental car. "Maybe," I say, "but it doesn't matter. I said what I came here to say. I corrected the record. I gave them a chance to understand what they did and who I became despite their choices. What they do with that information is their decision to make." Jake nods, seeming to understand that this was never about reconciliation or rebuilding relationships. This was about truth-telling, about refusing to let lies define my story, about ensuring that my parents couldn't continue to benefit from a false narrative that painted them as victims. "You know what the strangest part is?" I tell him as I unlock my car. "For 7 years, I wondered if I had made the right choice by cutting them off permanently. I wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But seeing them tonight, watching how they handled being confronted with the truth, I know I made the right decision." "How so?" Jake asks. "Because even now, even with all the evidence laid out in front of everyone, neither of my parents apologized. Dad tried to justify what they did by talking about pressure and stress. Mom just sat there crying but never once said she was sorry. They're still more concerned with protecting themselves than with acknowledging the harm they caused." I get into the car and roll down the window to continue our conversation. That tells me everything I need to know about whether they've changed, whether they've grown, whether they're capable of being the kind of family I would want to be part of. "So this really is goodbye?" Jake asks. "For me, it was goodbye 7 years ago," I reply. "Tonight was just making sure everyone else understood why." I drive away from the Riverside Community Center without looking back, heading toward the highway that will take me home to Portland. In my rearview mirror, I can see Jake standing in the parking lot, probably processing everything that just happened, maybe planning what he's going to say when he goes back inside to face the aftermath of my revelations. The drive home gives me time to think about what I've accomplished tonight and what it means for the rest of my life. For 7 years, I've carried the weight of being erased from my own family's story, of knowing that people believed a false narrative about who I was and what I had done. Tonight, I corrected that record in the most public way possible, ensuring that anyone who wants to know the truth now has access to it. But more than that, I proved to myself that I've truly moved beyond the girl who was abandoned in a hospital bed 7 years ago. That girl was desperate for her family's approval and love, willing to accept crumbs of affection and make excuses for their failures. The woman I've become doesn't need their validation or acceptance. She knows her own worth and doesn't require external confirmation to feel valuable. When I reach my apartment in Portland's Pearl District, I pour myself a glass of wine and sit on my balcony overlooking the city lights. Tomorrow, I'll go back to work at the hospital, where I'll help families navigate some of the most difficult moments of their lives. I'll hold the hands of scared parents and explain complicated medical procedures in terms they can understand. I'll advocate for children who need someone in their corner and comfort families who are facing their worst fears. That work has meaning because of what I experienced, not in spite of it. The abandonment I survived taught me how crucial family support is during medical crises. The isolation I endured showed me how much difference one caring person can make in someone's darkest moments. The strength I developed rebuilding my life from nothing gives me credibility when I tell other people they can survive whatever they're facing. My phone buzzes with a text message, and for a moment I wonder if one of my parents has found a way to contact me. But it's from Dr. Rodriguez, my former oncologist, who somehow heard about tonight's events through the small-town network that connects everyone in Riverside. "Sarah, I just heard what happened at your family reunion. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become and the courage you showed tonight. You've turned your pain into purpose, and you're making a difference in the lives of families who are walking the path you once walked alone. That's the best possible outcome from a terrible situation." I smile as I read her words, remembering the doctor who saw me through the worst months of my life and who never once made me feel like a burden or an inconvenience. Dr. Rodriguez understood that healing involves more than just treating disease. It requires treating the whole person, including their need for connection and support during vulnerable times. That's the lesson my parents never learned, and it's the reason they'll continue to struggle with what happened tonight long after I've moved on completely. They never understood that love isn't conditional on convenience, that family means showing up especially when it's difficult, that supporting someone through a crisis is a privilege, not a burden. I finish my wine and prepare for bed, already planning the work week ahead. Monday morning, I'll be back in the pediatric oncology unit, helping families navigate challenges similar to what I faced alone 7 years ago. The difference is that these families won't have to face those challenges alone, because I'll be there to guide them, support them, and advocate for them every step of the way. Tonight wasn't about getting revenge on my parents or punishing them for their choices. It was about reclaiming my story, correcting the record, and ensuring that the truth was finally told. It was about proving to myself that I've grown beyond needing their approval or acceptance to feel whole and valuable. Most importantly, it was about closure. For 7 years, I've wondered whether I would ever get the chance to set the record straight, to tell my side of the story, to correct the lies that have shaped how people think about me and my family. Tonight, I got that chance, and I took it. Now I can move forward with my life knowing that anyone who wants to understand what really happened has access to the truth. The people who choose to believe my parents' version of events, despite the evidence I presented tonight, are welcome to do so. Their opinion of me is no longer relevant to my happiness or success. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than who they think I should be. I've turned my painful experience into meaningful work that helps other families avoid the mistakes my own family made. I've proven that it's possible to not just survive abandonment and betrayal, but to thrive in spite of it. That's the real victory here. Not the public confrontation, or the moment when my father was speechless, or the looks of shock and dismay on my family's faces. The real victory is the life I've built, the person I've become, and the peace I feel knowing that I never have to wonder again whether I made the right choice in walking away from people who didn't deserve to be in my life. 7 years ago, I wrote a will because I thought I might die, and I wanted to make sure the people who actually cared about me would be taken care of. Tonight, I realized that will served a different purpose entirely. It was evidence that I chose to invest in relationships with people who valued me, even when I was at my most vulnerable. It was proof that I recognized my own worth, even when my family didn't. It was documentation that I never stopped fighting for a life worth living, even when the people who were supposed to fight alongside me chose to walk away instead. That 19-year-old girl writing her will in a hospital bed at 3 a.m. couldn't have imagined the life I have now. She couldn't have pictured herself confidently walking into a room full of people who believed lies about her, and calmly, clearly setting the record straight. She couldn't have envisioned a career that turns her pain into purpose, or a support system of friends and colleagues who see her value without conditions or limitations. But she would be proud of the woman I've become. She would be amazed by the strength I've developed and the happiness I've found. She would be grateful that I never gave up on the possibility of building something beautiful from the wreckage of what my family destroyed. As I turn off the lights and settle into bed, I feel something I haven't felt in 7 years. Complete peace with my decision to walk away from my family of origin and build a chosen family instead. Tonight proved that I made the right choice, that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and that the people who abandoned me during my darkest hour don't deserve to be part of my brightest moments. The silence I'm going to sleep in tonight isn't the crushing loneliness of abandonment. It's the peaceful quiet of someone who knows exactly who she is, what she's worth, and where she belongs. And that makes all the difference in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.